In Hebrew thought, a person's name meant more than just a title or label for identification. Rather, it was thought that a name revealed the essence, character, reputation, or fate of the person to whom it was given. As a result, every Hebrew name conveyed some form of message. Jesus is a prominent illustration of the relationship between biblical people's names and personalities. His name, Yeshua, means salvation, and he came to deliver salvation. Matthew 1 verses 21. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. On the other hand, the same may be stated about Nabal's life. But in his situation, was the name given to him at birth? Perhaps his parents gave him such a name or another name with a positive meaning, but as his character became clear, he came to be known as Nabal. In any event, the name Nabal fits the character described in 1 Samuel 25. Nabal's foolishness. When King Saul of Israel attempted to assassinate David, he sought refuge in the Judean wilderness. He was joined there by a motley crew of roughly 400 individuals who were in distress, in debt, or unhappy. While staying one step ahead of Saul, David and his improvised army protected everyone in the area, notably the shepherds of a wealthy rancher named Nabal. 1 Samuel 25 verses 1 through 3. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. The text says, "Then Samuel died." Samuel's death could have transpired while David was in the En-Gedi wilderness. 1 Samuel 24 verse 1. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi. His death, or the recording, came at an auspicious time. David had just been acknowledged as the successor of Saul by the king himself, and there was a short-lived truce between the two parties. The fact that the entire nation of Israel gathered at Ramah to honor Samuel at his burial demonstrated his popularity. Following Samuel's death, David traveled south to the wilderness of Paran, a desert location in the Sinai Peninsula's northeast portion. Maon was located about 8 miles south of Hebron in the Judean hill area. Carmel was about a mile north of Maon, on the outskirts of the Judean wilderness. Like the times of harvest, the shearing of sheep was a festive occasion. Nabal's behavior reveals that his moniker, which means fool, was fitting. Nabal was descended from the house of Caleb, which had occupied the area during the invasion. Abigail, a woman of knowledge and beauty, stood in stark contrast to her husband's folly. Her name could imply, "My father is rejoicing." 1 Samuel 25, verse 4 through 9. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him with my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my men. Since we come at a festive time, please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal his message in David's name. Then they waited. David sent his men on a feast day when most people express an admirational measure of generosity. The text says, "Please give whatever comes to your hand." Evidently, no price had been imposed for the services generated. Nabal lived in the forest and had thousands of sheep and goats, making him an easy target for thieves. David and his men had graciously guarded Nabal's herds and property. Nabal would have had enough cash from selling wool to compensate David and his men for their services because it was sheep shearing season. 1 Samuel 25, verse 10. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days." The text says, "Who is David?" Nabal pretended he didn't know David, and he added insult to injury by implying that David was simply another fugitive servant. 1 Samuel 25, verse 11. New International Version. Why should I take my bread and water, and the meat I have slaughtered from my shears, and give it to men coming from who knows where? Nabal lives in a dry location with limited access to water. Joshua 15 verse 19. New International Version. She replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. 1 Samuel 25 verses 12 to 16. New International Version. David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them." Nabal's own men testified to David and his men's care and protection of them. 1 Samuel 25 verse 17, New International Version. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. The text says, "For he is such a scoundrel." The servants were so enraged at their master that they spoke about him in this manner to his wife. The Hebrew term for scoundrel means son of Belial, or son of worthlessness. 1 Samuel 25 verse 18. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Abigail took matters into her own hands and gathered a large amount of stuff to recompense David and his troops. Wineskins were once transported in flexible containers made of animal skins. The Hebrew seah was a measure equivalent to 1/3 of an ephah, or about 1/5 of a bushel. 1 Samuel 25 verse 19. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. The text says, "Go on before me." Abigail wisely sent the provisions ahead to forestall any hostility caused by her husband's terrible conduct. 1 Samuel 25, verses 20 through 22. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He's paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." David was a very capable individual. He had fought men stronger than Nabal. Hence, a betting man would place his cash on David winning any battle. The text says, "May God do so, and more also." David swore an oath that if he did not slay everyone who worked for Nabal, God would punish him. 1 Samuel 25, verse 23-24. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say." Abigail's actions of humility were in stark contrast to her husband's obnoxious demeanor. She tried everything she could to show David respect when he was upset and to gain his forgiveness for the evil Nabal had done to him. 1 Samuel 25:25. "Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent." The text says, "For his name is," so is he. Nabal was an appropriate moniker for fool. Abigail's sarcastic humor at her husband's expense was intended to preserve his life. 1 Samuel 25:26. "And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed, and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal." Abigail said, "As the Lord lives." Abigail showed herself to David to be a woman of truthfulness, piety, and faith. 1 Samuel 25:27. "And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you." The text says, "This present, which," means the provisions mentioned in verse 18. These thoughtful presents reflect Abigail's desire to set things right. 1 Samuel 25:28. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. The text says an enduring house. Abigail's remarks suggest that she's expected David to succeed Saul and have a long line of heirs. 1 Samuel 25, verses 29 through 31. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. The text says bound in the bundle of the living. This metaphor echoes the custom of binding valuables in a bundle to protect them from injury. The point of that, God tends for his own, as a man cares for his valuable treasure. Abigail attempted to persuade David that his current misery was little in comparison to his future splendor. 1 Samuel 25, verse 31 through 35. My Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. David said to Abigail, Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, Go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request. The text says, respected your person. A literal translation of this phrase would be, I lift up your face. 1 Samuel 25, verse 35 through 38. Then David accepted from her hand what she thought had brought him, and said, Go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, so when she told him nothing at all until daybreak, then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. The text says his heart died within him like a stone. Nabal suffered a stroke and became paralyzed. The Lord struck Nabal's dying was the result of God's judgment. 1 Samuel 25, verse 39. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He's kept the servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. David gave praise to the Lord, for it was God who had exacted justice and not David himself. This story is a splendid example of the biblical motive, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Romans 12, verse 19. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, It is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. Deuteronomy 32:35. It is mine to avenge, I will repay. In due time their foot will slip. Their day of disaster is near, and their doom rushes upon them. 1 Samuel 25, verse 40-41. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife. She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, I am your servant and am ready to serve you, and wash the feet of my Lord's servants. The text says to wash the feet of the servants. It was a servant's job to wash the feet of others. Abigail stated her willingness to perform the most mundane tasks, and this was an honest statement of her appreciation for David. 1 Samuel 25, verses 42 through 44. Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Aniom of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel's son of Laish, who was from Galim. As we read about Abigail's reaction, we see how faithful God is to us. God saves David from doing something dreadful because of Abigail's reaction to the situation. God sends Abigail, who has far more common sense and insight, to deal with David. David was armed and ready to begin slaying people for such trivial matters. That doesn't feel very good to us. But consider some things that have made us angry in our own lives. Most of us have said or done things we later regret while we were upset. It's terrifying to consider how swiftly heated rage can erupt. Anger is frequently manifested as a flash fire, and David recognizes it here. He speaks to Abigail and thanks her for saving him from violence. Her reaction is one of a mediator. She saves bloodshed and is used by God to halt David from carrying out his awful plot via her kindness and humility, coming to David with so much food and an appeal for mercy. In the New Testament, James communicates to Christians about anger and how to deal with trying times in life. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. James 1 verses 19-20, New King James Version. We are commanded to be slow to speak and slow to wrath or anger. Giving ourselves over to anger isn't righteous, and it can lead us to do terrible things. Just like we saw with David, we must give our anger to God, being careful of both our actions and reactions. How do we make sure we're not like Nabal? How do we avoid letting anger overtake us, like it did David until Abigail stopped them? The Bible gives us the answer: the love of God. 1 Corinthians 13 verses 4-8. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Anger is countered by love, and it is the key to managing our behaviors as well as our reactions. Love is unbreakable.